There was a moment, somewhere in the last century, when oil stopped coming from a press and started coming from a factory. Nobody announced it. No law was passed. No vote was taken. One day, oil was something you could watch being made. The next, it required machinery most people would never see. The bottle looked the same, the word on the label stayed the same, but what was inside had quietly become something else. This wasn't hidden. It wasn't a secret. It was simply how things were done now. Efficiency had arrived. Cost had dropped. Shelf life had extended. And over time, the old methods stopped making sense. They were slower. They were smaller. They required more space, more labor, more time. So they faded. Not because anyone decided they should, but because nobody decided they shouldn't. Within a generation, oil cooking had become a product of chemistry, not agriculture. A substance extracted under pressure and heat, refined through solvents, stripped of color and scent, then bottled in clear plastic and sold by the gallon. It looked clean. It poured easily. It lasted months without spoiling. And it became the foundation of nearly every meal. If this perspective feels different, you're not alone. Before oil came from factories, it came from seeds, nuts, and fruit. Olive oil was pressed from olives. Sesame oil came from sesame seeds. In some regions, people used butter or animal fat. In others, they used coconut or palm. The oil carried flavor. It carried scent. It carried the identity of the plant it came from. Pressing oil was local work. It happened in small mills, often family-owned, sometimes operated by a single person who had learned the craft from a parent or mentor. A farmer brought seeds, sometimes a bushel, sometimes a cartful. The amount depended on the harvest, the season, the needs of the household. The seeds were cleaned. Debris was removed by hand. Stones, stems, damaged seeds, anything that might affect the quality of the oil. Then the seeds were placed into a press. In some regions, this was a stone mill. In others, a wooden screw press. In some places, a simple lever and weight system. Pressure was applied, slowly, steadily. Oil dripped out, thick and golden, sometimes amber, sometimes green if the fruit was young. The process was visible. A person could stand in the room and watch it happen. They could see the oil collect in a basin. They could smell it as it emerged. There was no mystery, no hidden step, no chemical intervention. What came out was used within weeks. It didn't sit on shelves for months. It didn't travel across continents. It was made, sold, and consumed in the same region. Because oil degrades, exposure to air begins oxidation. Exposure to light accelerates it. Exposure to heat compounds it. So oil was kept in dark containers, clay jars, tin vessels. Small quantities were purchased at a time. In some cultures, oil was stored underground where temperatures remained stable. In others, it was kept in the coolest part of the house, away from windows. Oil was a finishing element, a drizzle over bread, a base for a vinaigrette, a medium for frying, used sparingly. It was expensive relative to other staples, more expensive than flour, grain, or dried beans, so it was treated with care. A household might use a few liters over the course of a month, sometimes less. The amount varied depending on wealth, region, and tradition. Meals were often built around water, heat, and time, boiling, steaming, roasting over fire, braising in broth. Oil was present, but it was not the center. A stew might begin with a small amount of oil to soften onions, Then water or stock would be added. The oil provided flavor at the beginning, but the dish didn't depend on it. Bread was baked with minimal fat, or none at all. Vegetables were roasted with a light coating, not submerged. Frying, when it happened, was an event. It required enough oil to submerge food, which meant using a significant portion of a household's supply. So fried food was reserved for celebrations, for special occasions, for moments that justified the expense. Kitchens smelled like the oil being used. Olive oil had a distinct fruity aroma. Sesame oil was nutty, sometimes almost sweet. Butter carried the scent of cream and salt. The oil was part of the flavor, not separate from it. A dish cooked in olive oil tasted like olive oil. This wasn't considered a flaw, it was the point. Regional cuisines developed around the oils that were available. Mediterranean food was built on olive oil. Middle Eastern food often used sesame. South Asian cooking incorporated mustard seed oil or ghee. The oil wasn't neutral, it contributed character. People didn't think of oil as a neutral substance. It was regional, it was particular, it was tied to the land it came from. An olive oil from Greece tasted different from one from Spain, even if both came from the same variety of olive. Soil mattered. Climate mattered. The timing of the harvest mattered. People knew this. They could taste it. In some regions, families had preferred producers. They returned to the same mill each season because they trusted the quality. Oil was a product of place. Storage was a concern. Oil could go rancid. The fats would break down. The smell would turn sour. The taste would become sharp, unpleasant. It had to be kept cool, away from light. In some climates, this was difficult. In hot, dry regions, oil was stored in cellars or buried partially underground. In humid regions, it was kept in sealed containers to prevent moisture from accelerating spoilage. There was no refrigeration, no nitrogen flushing, no synthetic antioxidants. So oil had a lifespan, a window during which it was at its best. After that, it declined. This limited how much could be made at once. It limited how far it could travel. It limited how long it could sit before being sold. There was no such thing as vegetable oil in the general sense. There was only olive, or sesame, or sunflower, or mustard. Each had a name. Each had a character. A cook didn't reach for oil. They reached for a specific oil, chosen for a specific purpose. Olive oil for certain dishes, butter for others, sesame oil for finishing, mustard oil for heat. The choice mattered. It shaped the outcome. Oil was part of a meal's identity. A dish made with butter tasted different from one made with olive oil. The oil was not interchangeable. This wasn't considered limiting. It was the nature of cooking. Ingredients had identities. They contributed something specific. A cook worked with those qualities, not around them. This wasn't inconvenient in a world where food was local. It was simply how things were. People ate what grew nearby. They cooked with what was available. They adapted recipes to the materials at hand. Oil was one ingredient among many, important but not dominant, flavorful but not overwhelming. It had a place. It had a role. And for most of human history, that role remained relatively stable. Then, over the course of a few decades, that began to change. Not suddenly, not visibly, not in a way that felt like disruption. It happened through incremental shifts, through industrial capacity, through economic pressure. Not because anyone objected to the old methods, but because industry saw an opportunity. Seeds were abundant. Machinery was improving. Chemistry was advancing. And oil, it turned out, could be made in entirely new ways. Ways that were faster, cheaper, more efficient. Ways that required factories instead of mills, solvents instead of presses, refinement instead of patience. The oil that emerged from these new methods didn't look like the oil that came before. It didn't smell like it. It didn't taste like it. But it could be produced at a scale that traditional methods could never match. And that changed everything. In the late 19th century, chemists discovered that oil could be extracted from plants that were not traditionally used for oil. Cottonseed, for example, a byproduct of cotton farming, previously considered waste. Soybeans, corn, rapeseed. These plants were abundant. They were cheap, but their oils were difficult to extract using traditional presses. The oil was trapped inside. Pressing alone didn't release enough to make it economical. So a new method was developed: hexane extraction. Hexane is a solvent. It dissolves oil. When seeds are soaked in hexane, the oil separates. The hexane is then evaporated away, leaving the oil behind. This method could extract nearly all the oil from a seed. It was fast, it was efficient, it could be done at scale. Suddenly, oil could be made from crops that were already being grown for other purposes. Cottonseed oil became a way to monetize waste. Soybean oil turned a livestock feed crop into a dual-purpose product. The cost of production dropped. But there was a problem. The oil that came out of hexane extraction didn't look like olive oil. It was dark. It smelled strong. It tasted bitter. It contained impurities, phospholipids, free fatty acids, pigments. It wasn't something people would want to cook with, so it had to be refined. First, degumming. Water or acid was added to remove phospholipids. Then, neutralization. An alkaline solution was used to remove free fatty acids. Then, bleaching. The oil was filtered through clay to remove color. Then, deodorization. The oil was heated to high temperatures under vacuum to remove volatile compounds, anything that contributed to smell or taste. What remained was a clear, odorless, tasteless liquid. It looked clean, it poured smoothly, it had a long shelf life. It could be bottled, shipped, and stored for months without refrigeration. And it was inexpensive. From a manufacturing perspective, this was a triumph. Oil could now be made from crops that were already being grown for abundance. It could be produced at scale. It could be sold cheaply. From a consumer perspective, it was convenient. One bottle of oil could be used for anything. It didn't interfere with the flavor of food. It didn't spoil quickly. It made sense. It solved problems that traditional oils couldn't. And so, within a few decades, refined vegetable oil became the standard.
At first, refined oils were marketed as modern, as scientific, as progress. Cottonseed oil was sold as pure and clean. Advertisements emphasized its clarity, its neutrality, its long shelf life. Butter, by contrast, was old-fashioned. Animal fats were heavy, traditional, associated with rural life. Vegetable oil was light. It was industrial. It was the future. Margarine, made from hydrogenated vegetable oil, was introduced as a butter substitute. It was cheaper. It didn't require refrigeration. It spread easily. During wartime rationing, vegetable oils became essential. Butter was scarce. Animal fats were redirected to military needs. Households adapted. After the war, the oils stayed. By the mid-20th century, cooking oil was no longer something with a specific origin. It was simply vegetable oil. The label didn't specify which vegetables. It didn't need to. The oil was interchangeable. Soybean oil, canola oil, corn oil, sunflower oil. All refined using the same methods, all clear, neutral, and shelf-stable. Restaurants adopted them. They were cheaper than butter or lard. They could be reused multiple times. They didn't add flavor, which meant they didn't interfere with seasoning. Home cooks adopted them. They were sold in large bottles. They were versatile. They were easy. Fried food became more common. Oil was abundant and inexpensive, so frying was no longer a special occasion. It became routine. Processed foods began to rely on vegetable oils. Crackers, cookies, frozen meals, salad dressings, snack foods. Oil was no longer a finishing touch. It was a base ingredient. And because it was neutral, it was invisible. Nobody tasted it. Nobody noticed it. It was just there. By the 1980s, health organizations began recommending vegetable oils over animal fats. Saturated fat was linked to heart disease. Vegetable oils were polyunsaturated, which sounded better. The advice was clear. Replace butter with margarine. Replace lard with vegetable oil. People followed the advice. Cooking oil had become not only normal, but virtuous. It wasn't just cheaper or more convenient, it was healthier. Or so it seemed.
Over the decades that followed, something shifted. Not all at once. Not in a way anyone could point to and say, this is when it changed. But the human diet had quietly transformed. Oil consumption increased. Not because people were drizzling more oil on their salads, but because oil was now in everything. Bread, cereal, granola bars, frozen vegetables, canned soup, pasta sauce. Oil had become a filler, a texture enhancer, a preservative. It extended shelf life, it improved mouthfeel, it made food feel richer without adding expensive ingredients. Restaurants used it in larger quantities. Deep fryers ran continuously. Oil was cheaper than labor, so food could be prepared faster by frying rather than roasting or steaming. Fast food chains standardized their recipes around vegetable oil. Predictable, consistent, cost-effective. The oil itself had changed too. To make liquid oils solid at room temperature, useful for margarine, shortening, and baked goods, manufacturers used hydrogenation. Hydrogenation added hydrogen atoms to the oil's molecular structure. This made it more stable. It also created trans fats. Trans fats were not natural. They didn't exist in traditional foods. They were a byproduct of industrial processing. For decades, they were considered safe. Then, research began to show otherwise. Trans fats raised LDL cholesterol. They lowered HDL cholesterol. They increased inflammation. They were linked to heart disease. By the early 2000s, trans fats were being phased out, but the oils themselves remained. Refined vegetable oils were still the foundation of processed food, still the standard in restaurants, still the default in home kitchens. And they were consumed in quantities that would have been unimaginable a century earlier. The oils were high in omega-6 fatty acids. In small amounts, omega-6s are necessary, but in large amounts, they can promote inflammation. Traditional diets had a rough balance between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, somewhere around 4:1. Modern diets skewed heavily toward omega-6, 20:1, 30:1. This wasn't because people were eating more seeds. It was because oil extracted from seeds had become ubiquitous. The oil was refined at high heat. This created oxidation. Oxidized fats are unstable. When consumed, they can contribute to cellular stress. The oil was often reused in commercial fryers. Each heating cycle degraded it further. None of this was immediately visible. People didn't feel different after eating a meal cooked in vegetable oil. There was no acute reaction, no immediate symptom. But over years, over decades, patterns emerged. Rates of chronic inflammation increased. Cardiovascular disease remained prevalent despite the shift away from animal fats. Metabolic disorders became more common. It's difficult to isolate a single cause. Diet is complex. Lifestyle factors matter. Genetics play a role. But the timing is notable. The rise of refined vegetable oils coincided with the rise of processed food, and the rise of processed food coincided with shifts in public health. Correlation is not causation, but the connection is worth observing.
Most of these changes didn't feel like decisions. They felt like progress. Cheaper oil meant more accessible food. Neutral oil meant more flexibility in cooking. Shelf-stable oil meant less waste. Each step forward solved a problem. It's only in retrospect that the cumulative effect becomes visible. If this way of seeing history resonates, this channel may feel familiar to you. Today, cooking oil is still refined, clear, and neutral. It's still inexpensive. It's still ubiquitous. It's still the foundation of most processed and restaurant food. Some people have returned to traditional oils, cold-pressed, unrefined, sold in small bottles, opaque glass, kept in cool places. These oils are more expensive. They taste like something. They don't last as long. For most people, they remain niche, because the infrastructure of food is built around refined oil. The supply chains, the factories, the distribution networks, the restaurant equipment. Changing oil would require changing the system, and systems don't change quickly. They change when enough people stop participating in them, or when economic pressures make alternatives more viable, or when new research shifts public understanding. But for now, oil remains what it became a century ago: a neutral industrial substance, extracted with solvents, refined with heat, stripped of identity, used in quantities that would have been unimaginable to previous generations, not because anyone decided this was the right amount, but because nobody decided it was too much. This wasn't the last decision of its kind.